All right. Did it fire up?
Yeah.
All right, cool. We are, of course, continuing our study in Genesis chapter 17. Last week, I think everyone's got a handout here. We made it up through verse 5. Just a very quick recap. This is the first time that the name El Shaddai appears in Hebrew. We're going to be having all of these names for God being rolled out here by Moses as we move along. So this is the first appearance of El Shaddai. And of course, this is all about the demonstration of God's power. Abram is 99, Sarai is 90, and of course there's the promise of the covenant. Abram then prostrates himself, literally gets down and lays on his stomach and his chest and prostrates himself before Elohim God, right? And then the promise comes that he's going to be, with the name change from Abram to Abraham, not just exalted father, but a father of multitudes. And of course, then we were talking about the various texts also from the New Testament, whether it's Matthew 25, Matthew 28, Colossians 2, because the whole circumcision thing is about ready to be brought up. Then you turn the page to page 2, and then we also looked at Matthew chapter 3, Ephesians chapter 2. Well, no, that's where we're going to start up here. So now, speaking of God raising up children for Abraham, does someone want to read Matthew chapter 3 and what Jesus has to say here? I actually have the quote on the paper. Made it easy for you. The Matthew 3 quote at the top.
And right up here? Uh-huh.
Yes.
And do not presume to say to yourselves, we have Abram as our father. For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children from Adam.
No.
Children for Abraham. Yeah.
For Abraham.
Even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Even trees, therefore, that does not bear fruit is cut down and thrown into fire.
Okay, so here he's having a heated discussion, we'll call it, with the religious elites, and their basic premise is that God is their father because Abraham is their father. Genetically, of course, they're talking here. And of course, Jesus has a bone to pick with that, because that's the same sort of unfortunate, I'll be kind, unfortunate attitude that got their forefathers in trouble generation after generation after generation, which is this lazy spirituality that I'm in the covenant because I have the right daddy, right? So as opposed to actually working to be like Abraham, which is obedient, right? To believe the word and to be obedient, right? And so here he reminds them that even now the axe is laid at the root of the trees. Of course, here at the end of the church year liturgical calendar, the last 2 Sundays is always about judgment, right? The immediate fulfillment in the apostolic era, 70 AD, Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, who would be the future emperor, go to Palestine and basically wipe the Jews off the map over the course of a couple of years. Lay siege to the outer walls of Jerusalem. They break through that. Then they break through into the Fortress Antonia. And then they ultimately break through into the inner fortress, which included the temple on Moriah, right? And of course, then thus fulfills what Jesus spoke, as we learned last week from Mark 13, Mark's rendition of that prophecy, when Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, and they're saying, what wonderful stones, what wonderful buildings. And he says, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left upon another, right? If you want to read further account on that, Flavius Josephus, an ancient Jewish general who actually lived during those events and saw it with his own eyes before he himself was taken off, wrote basically about 100 pages on this topic. And I have the book down in the gymnasium. It's a book about this thick of the history of the Jewish people, but he devotes about 100 pages to that. Now, he's not even a follower of Jesus Christ. He's not a disciple, right? And so we get basically the secular Jewish perspective of the collapse of the Jewish state in 70 AD, including the destruction of the Second Temple, right? Now, one stone not left upon another is because Herod the Great did an amazing job as an Idumean king who was hated by his full-blooded Jewish brothers because he was a half-blooded Jewish brother as an Idumean. Idumean. Is it Idumean? Median. Yeah, something like that. I'm talking about his tribe, right?
Oh, his tribe.
So the Romans basically were poking the Jews in the eyeball by appointing Herod over them because Herod was a half-breed, right? So the Jews didn't like that, right? So, but he was still, although he was unbelievably ruthless, including executing 2 of his own sons. Matter of fact, he was so ruthless and efficient in his job that Caesar Augustus said, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son," which of course is another little play on words for all the Jews out there, because
Pig being an unclean animal.
Pigs are unclean, right? They don't fit the diet, the kosher diet. So anyways, yeah, he was ruthless. But one thing that he did that was amazing is he took the shell of Zerubbabel's temple from the intertestamental period, the 400 years. The period following Daniel and the escape from the diaspora under the Babylonians and the Persians, when they went back and they rebuilt the gates, rebuilt the city, rebuilt the walls, even though all the tribes around them were trying to stop them. The great king, I think it was Cyrus or Darius, one of the two, I can never keep them straight, sent them a portion of them back into the land. So they rebuilt the temple. But the elders who were children at the time, when Nebuchadnezzar broke down the walls to begin with in 586, 587 BC, depending upon how you date it, actually wept because they remembered the glory of Solomon's temple, right? Even though they were small children at the time, when you read the description of what went into Solomon's temple, it was rather one of the ancient wonders of the world, right? So what was put up then was a poor version of it, right? But then Herod, several centuries later, actually spent over 50 years and a fortune rebuilding, reconstructing, beautifying, decorating the Second Temple. There are many ancient accounts of how gorgeous it was. Apparently the roof, some say it was bronze, some say it was copper. But when you were on some of the peaks surrounding and the sun hit it, it would shine like a beacon of light. And also there are other accounts that said that Herod laid a gold bead between each of the stones, right? And so the Romans, in order to get the gold out, because if you've been a soldier and you've suffered for 2 years and you've watched I think it was a couple years, something, or maybe I'm thinking of Masada. It was at least several months. I'd have to go back and reference Josephus. If you've suffered and you've watched your comrades die and you've bled for Caesar, and Caesar says, okay, as soon as these walls are coming down, kill everybody and take whatever you want, that's what you do. As soldiers, right? And so they literally toppled every single stone, thus fulfilling the prophecy of Jesus of Nazareth. And of course, then in Mark 13, they asked him, what will be the sign of these things? How will we know? And I preached about that on Sunday. So at the end of the day, here, though, St. Paul reminds us in Ephesians chapter 2, if someone wants to read that it doesn't matter if the stones of the old covenant have been toppled down. It doesn't matter. Why? Go ahead and read Ephesians chapter 2.
So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you are also being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit.
Okay. So God is to dwell with man, and the Lord by the Spirit is supposed to dwell within us, and we become his holy temple. Not temples of stone, but rather temples of flesh. So it can work both ways, right? If you're arrogant and an unbelieving Jew who, even though Abraham is your father, but you obstinately deny his word over and over again and do not keep his covenant, even denying his own son, as in Matthew chapter 3, then God doesn't need you. He can raise up children for Abraham even out of stone. He can turn stone into flesh, and he can turn flesh into stone. He can do whatever he wants. But of course here, he's going to talk about the ultimate Christological fulfillment, that the seed, the zerah, which we've been talking about, the Hebrew word, all the way from Genesis chapter 3, is the chief cornerstone, even going back to Genesis. All the promises, rock solid, the cornerstone of our faith, even God's own temple, is the zerah, who is Jesus in the flesh, right? So we are his house, whether we are Jew or Gentile. Christ is the cornerstone upon which the Holy Church is built. Now, why is this important? Why am I bringing this up? And what does this have to do with Genesis chapter 17? Well, we're going to see it's right in the text. But before we get there, speaking of renaming, the renaming of Abraham, and later here we're going to study the renaming of Sarai, you also will receive a new name. Did you know that? Someone read Revelation chapter 2 there.
He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone, with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it.
You, on the day of your resurrection, will receive a white stone, and you'll be able to flip it over, and your new name will be upon it.
Oh, gee.
Did you know that? Now, he's actually calling upon St. John in the Apocalypse of Jesus Christ, in what we commonly call Revelation chapter 2, is calling upon an imagery that people would understand, because in the ancient world, like for example at the Greek games, the victors would all be given a white stone with a symbol on it, and that stone would give them entry to the celebrations, the banquets, the feasts that would follow all the games, right? But you could not enter in without the white stone into the feast, right? So what are we doing on the day of resurrection? We are entering into the wedding supper of the Lamb, right? The church is entering in. We're in white festal garments, which symbolizes the robe of our righteousness, baptism, right? And we're entering into the feast which has no end, right? Yes.
I thought when we were baptized, we were given a name then.
Well, you
show-
have
you
have your
have-
Christian name
yes.
given at the font. Yes, absolutely. But on the day of resurrection, you'll receive a secret
See,
name.
that was something new. I didn't know.
Yeah, there you go. Oh,
So you
even
get
more.
2 names, Kenny.
Yes.
How do you know? One on each side of the stone?
That's probably.
Maybe. I don't know. We're going to find out.
Does that have any correlation with the priests and that and the tabernacles, because they had to wear stones and any of
Yeah.
that type of things? Any of that connected? maybe?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. This Revelation 2 passage is a very unique passage. It just comes out of the blue, and I don't know about another reference except from the ancient world that the white stone would grant
Entrance.
Yes, it would grant you entrance to the feast, following the celebrations, following the game. So,
See, it's not a little
okay.
card. It's
So let's get back
The good
to.
thing about when you get the white stone,
yeah.
you know your name's written in the book of life.
That's right.
Amen.
The name. It's. Yeah, that's probably. That's probably a good reference. Your baptismal name is probably in the book of life, and then you get the white stone that has the name given to you from God. Your rename. All right, so does someone want to read? We're back in 17. Let's go ahead and read verses. Where am I here? Read 5, 6, and 5. Yeah, let's just go 5 through 8. 5 through 8.
called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations. And kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring and you. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God.
Okay, so 3 verses in a row. Now there's at least two things going on here that I want to highlight. There it is. So first of all, let's look at 2 Hebrew concepts here. The first is he keeps calling them nations, 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 right? That's the English word, of course. In Hebrew, the word here is goy. Goy. And this, goyim, are the Gentiles. That's the Jewish word for Gentiles. So, in Greek, it's ethne. Ethne. Go therefore and make disciples of te ethne, the nations, or pas ethne, all nations, right? And of course, in the book of Revelation, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, we see that there are representatives in the kingdom from every tribe, nation, tongue, language, all of those, right? And this last week, in Mark chapter 13, Jesus reminds them of the signs that are going to happen. Most of the signs are very generic: earthquakes, wars, rumors of wars. Well, that stuff is always going on, but the very specifics, even you'll be beaten in the synagogues and you'll give testimony before governors and kings. Those are all very specific to the apostles. But what about the very end of the age? Because remember, I talked about mountain ranges, right, in that sermon. That if you're in multiple mountain ranges, right, and it's like the Rocky Mountains, and you just happen to be here, and think of this, I can only do 2-dimensional drawing. This is the best I can do, right? My stick people are so bad that other people's stick people make fun of my stick people. So they're mocked. It's terrible. So imagine, if you will, 3-dimensionally, you're seeing all these peaks, right? Well, I can't tell the distance from here to here, here to there, let alone from here to here or here to here, right? I can't tell time, right? So you have biblical prophecy, 70 AD, the immediate fulfillment. The book of Acts, they're drug into courts. They're drug into the synagogues. They're beaten for the testimony, that for the witness they give, which the Greek word is martyria, which we get martyrdom from, right? Even John the Baptist gave a witness unto death, right? All the apostles, they were all wiped out, killed, right? Whether by the hand of Jew or Gentile, right? So, but then there's often there's other fulfillments, even the end times, the telos, the end of days. At the very, very end game. And Jesus in Mark 13 describes this as birth pains. Remember I preached about that on Sunday? Mm-hmm. So I've never personally experienced this, nor do I ever want to. However, I have it on good authority that natural birth is an increasing frequency and intensity of pain until the child is brought forth, even to the point where you think you might even be dying, right? That's what I've been told, right? And then, so such is the end game, the telos, at the end of the age, right? So you have 70 AD, you have the apostles, you have all these fulfillments, but ultimately Jesus says very interestingly, and I think this is the specific sign which makes sense, right? In the book of Acts you see, he says that the gospel must go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth, right? And he says in Mark 13 that the gospel has to go to all the goyim, in Hebrew, the ethne of the Greek. Every ethnic group, every tribe, every tongue, every language, right? It's the table of nations from Genesis in reverse, right? Through Pentecost. He then, at the Tower of Babel, they're united. He confuses the language and he spreads them out throughout the earth.
Scattered.
Now he brings them back in, right? And I said there's 2 regions that we know of, unless there's something crazy going on down in Antarctica, and we can talk conspiracy theories some other time. But we know that there's the Amazon rainforest, which, in the deep, deep part of the forest, there we know that there's unreached tribes because they can catch them by plane, get them on video and pictures, helicopter, drone, and they just throw spears. The old spear chucking joke, that they're not joking. They actually are throwing spears and darts, and they don't want to be reached, right? But they're going to be reached, right? Then there's also, I forget how to spell this, Papua New Guinea.
New Guinea, yeah, that's
Yeah, that is the other place. I don't know what Lutherans, I know other Christian groups are working hard in the Amazon. I know we have actually missionaries on the ground in Papua New Guinea.
Yes.
Right? And there you also have dense rainforests for hundreds of thousands of square kilometers or miles, if you prefer that system. Massive island after island after island, dense forest. And we know also because we can see them by air, they're very elusive. They don't want to be contacted, right?
Now, what would they do if you did go in? Are they very
We should
aggressive?
send you and find out, Barb. We should send
They'll kill
you.
ya.
Gee, Barb, thanks.
Remember we talked about the pig?
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd be cooked.
Well, see, it's not like a Star Trek episode where you can show up on a planet and speak English,
yeah.
or you have a little translator, little handheld
right.
translator. We actually, it's really so we have to make contact. They have to want to be made contact with, and then we have to find a way to understand
them
their
too,
language,
yeah.
and then you have to basically. In all these cases, you have to create an alphabet. Then you have to teach them to read their language in the alphabet that you make up. And then you start a fresh translation from scratch with the New Testament. It takes decades to
Yeah,
do
there
this stuff.
there was a woman sponsored by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Yeah.
She spent 20 years doing exactly what you said,
Yep.
teaching them, and she was sponsored by the
Yeah. And you got to find somebody
Yeah.
who's willing to risk cannibalism.
Right.
Or
No,
the
no.
headhunters, right?
It takes a patient person.
it does. It takes
And-
someone who's called to give a witness, even potentially unto death. Right. So anyways, but they may run and hide, but they can't run and hide from Jesus. Jesus is going to find him. He's going to track him down, and he's going to do it through the means of the church. And eventually, they're all going to hear the gospel, and some will believe. And that, ladies and gentlemen, when that sign is fulfilled, I'm about as far as a pastor can be. I'm about 99.99% sure that's the sign. Once the gospel goes forth, then at that point there's nothing left to hold back the Father from sending the Son again, right? I don't get into dispensationalism where they got the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, right? And as the newspaper changed, the Bible interpretation changes, right? The gospel is the key to all of this, right? Is once that goes forth and every representative whose name is written in the book of life, as you brought up earlier, everyone who's going to get that white stone, that's it. Then the end will come swiftly, right? The end game, the telos. And at that point, that's when, as Jesus says in Mark chapter 13 from this week's text, that you'll see that even the most horrific situations of fathers turning in children and children turning in parents, and you will...
Even unto death.
Right. All of you will be hated for my name's sake, right? So no Christian is going to escape. There's no Left Behind series. Sorry to all our dispensationalist Baptist friends out there. Love you in the camera. But there will be no rapture. There's none of that. Just as the prophets and the apostles did not escape suffering and death. We must bear a witness even unto death. Now we pray and hope, right, Barb?
Yes, I'm
That-
ready.
That it doesn't fall to us.
So this rapture thing you keep hearing about is not a thing. And
Right. The Apostles' Creed is correct. The ancient church
Yeah.
fathers, and he shall come again to judge both the living and the dead. End of story. There's no secret rapture. There's no 2 secret raptures, 3 secret raptures, depending upon what kind of dispensationalist you are. All of that theology
and
comes
he's not
out,
going to be he's not going to walk the earth for so many thousands of years.
and then disappear again, then come back,
Yeah,
and there'll be
he
another
would-
war.
No.
All that's bad dispensational theology from the 19th century.
Yeah.
If your theology doesn't show up till the 1900s, you've missed the boat. Sorry. And it isn't just the dispensationalists. Even our Roman brothers and sisters have a lot of creative theology that comes out of their 19th century too. So we just don't do anything with any of that stuff. It just has no bearing on what we believe. So, of course, if they are wrong, if they are right and we're wrong and we are raptured, well, I don't think we're all going to be complaining about it. Oh, darn it, I missed the beheading. Darn it. No. But I'm pretty confident
Can I get
that
this white stone later?
I was really hoping to be taken flayed.
I want to be sawn into.
Yeah,
like it
sawn
says.
into like Isaiah. Right? All right, no. I think whatever generation that is, they need not fret, as it says in Mark chapter 2. Even what they will say in that day, Jesus says, for the Holy Spirit himself will give them words to speak on that day. So, anyways, we'll leave that terrible sadness behind and we'll move on to happier things, right? And that is verse 7, right? Now there's a double fulfillment here. There are 2 seeds, all right? So we were talking about Zerah. There are seeds and the seed. Remember the Hebrew word from Genesis chapter 3, Zerah? Right? Offspring is often translated in English. Right? The Zerah. Now, speaking of double fulfillments, think of your mountain range here. The immediate fulfillment is his offspring is going to be who?
Isaac.
Well, that's
Well,
the
Ishmael
seed of
first.
promise. First comes Ishmael, which is not the seed of promise, because he is a product of human intervention, not divine intervention.
What you say was connected with the law?
Yeah, well, Saint Paul brings that up in Galatians, that using the typology there of that Ishmael and Hagar are Sinai, right? They are the legalistic fulfillment of the law of having a son, but by human intervention, right? Whereas the covenant of the promise is Sarah and Isaac, right? Because you can take your handmaiden and link him up with the old guy and you might get a kid, but that's not how God was going to do it. God was going to do it by impossible means. So that any pretense of human rationalism is utterly destroyed, right? I can't reason my way out of this. I can't go in for fertility treatments and whatever. It's like, no, this is literally miraculous going on, right? Because he's 99 at this point. And of course, then ultimately it's Isaac, which we'll get to, speaking of names here in a moment. So Isaac is the child of the promise. He is the Jerusalem, as St. Paul says in Galatians, from above, whereas Isaac is Sinai. Or Ishmael is Sinai, right? Now, does that mean that Ishmael is abandoned? No, we're going to get to that here in a moment, right? He's still out of Abraham. So, that is the seeds, plural. This is offsprings, plural. However, through the line of Abraham, you have the messianic seed, which is promised to Eve in Genesis chapter 3, that from her own flesh will come a Zerah who will bruise and or crush the head of the serpent. That, of course, is going to come through where whoever the child of promise is, the lineage will be through him, not through Ishmael, right? And that, of course, is the interesting debate, because if you're of Ishmael and his line, you want this to be reversed, right? And that's what Islam does. Islam reverses the covenant. Isaac is the illegitimate son. Ishmael is the legitimate firstborn child, right? So the promise of, why am I forgetting what they call him? What's it in Arabic for God? Allah, right? Allah blesses Ishmael, not Isaac, right? So of course we don't believe that as Christians. All right, so that is the seed, the capital T-H-E definite article, seed is who?
Isaac.
Who comes down through Isaac?
Christ.
Specifically Jesus of Nazareth. Nazareth, right? Who is then Christ, the anointed one, King of David, right? Son of David, which we're going to get to here in a moment. So, the Zerah, Jesus of Nazareth, also interestingly fulfills the law in his flesh, the law of circumcision, because Jesus himself is circumcised on the 8th day, and we actually celebrate a feast day in January every single year. The circumcision and name of Jesus is actually a feast day where it's the first time he sheds his blood for us because he is circumcised on the 8th day, right? Which is a precursor of his crucifixion and our baptism, right? Being dead and buried with Christ in our baptism. And we'll get to that here in a moment. So, the incarnate of the seed, he must come and take on flesh, otherwise the promise given to Eve and given to Abraham cannot be fulfilled. He has to be God in the flesh. And remember when we were studying chapter 4 in Genesis, right? Eve so believes the promise that when Cain is born, speaking of birth pains, right, ladies, she gives birth. What a terrible disappointment that must be. To give birth to your firstborn son who's a murderer. That must have been rough, all right? But by faith, she says, behold, I have begotten a man God, right? The English translations are wonky. Behold, I have begotten a man with the help of the Lord. There is no help of the Lord in the Hebrew text. It says, behold, I have begotten a man God. I think it's man God in that order, right? A man who is God, right? And of course, she's looking forward to, she believes the promise. She understands that Yahweh is going to take on flesh from the womb. Of course, yes.
But it wasn't him.
Yeah, a little, speaking of mountain peaks and fulfillments, right? The first fulfillment was a terrible disappointment, right? However, through a better Eve, through the Virgin Mary, because if you think about it, in many ways, the Virgin is the better Eve, right? Because Eve's obedience